Hello everyone and welcome to the first session of the seminar Video Games Between Contagion and Reality. Over the past decade, video games undergo a dramatic politicization. Initially viewed as an asocial pastime, after events like Gamergate and the 2016 US presidential election, gaming communities have been increasingly perceived as incubators of far-right and reactionary politics and worldviews. However, mainstream critique uh, has rarely explored how these developments relate to the broader evolution of the gaming industry, or why the latter was completely unprepared for the shockwave of populist energy. This seminar traces how video games moved from being solitary pursuits to deeply social and networked practices, and how debates between narratology, which is the study of games as narrative, and ludology, the study of games as play, have shaped both academic and popular perceptions of the medium. Ultimately, we will examine how video games became entangled with the forces of platform capitalism, social antagonism, and contemporary political struggles, reflecting what Roger Caillois once called the contagion of reality, hence the title. Participants will engage in reading and critical discussion of foundational texts, debating and providing case analysis, dealing with case studies to understand video games as sites where art, technology, and politics collide. Session 1, a new art form, introduces game studies through the works of Johan Huizinga, Roger Caillois, and Phelan Parker, examining how the concept of play generates culture and how video games eventually emerge as an art form. Session 2, Rise of Narratology, explores Janet Murray's notion of video games as multiform digital texts, contextualized within the technological shift from arcades and ARPANET to home consoles and the growth of artificial intelligence. Session 3, the ludological turn, proceeding from foundational writings such as Espen Arthet, Cybertext, Gonzalo Frescas, Ludology Meets Narratology, and The Gaming Situation by Markku Eskelinen reconstructs the emergence of ludology as the dominant paradigm in current game studies. It will also discuss how online gaming had fostered user-centered content. Fourth and the final session, titled Crisis Real and Imagined, breaks down the Gamergate, analyzing the industry's profitability crisis and how backlash to changes in gaming was expressed in a wider campaign against progressive voices. As a closure, the session will we discuss how video games reveal social antagonisms, characteristic of platform capitalism of today. The central reading for this session would be the latest book of Ian Bogost, Play Anything. Our instructor, Conrad Hamilton, is a postdoctoral research fellow, my apologies, at the School of Politics and International Relations.
Technically an assistant professor now, by the way. That's new though. The ink's still wet on the contract, so there you go.
Let's see. Okay, associate assistant professor, yes? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Conrad Hamilton is assistant professor at the School of Politics and International Relations at East China Normal University, a junior research fellow at the Center for Ecological Civilization, a member of programming committee of the new Center for Research and Practice, and editor of the International Journal of Cultural Studies. His research concerns the relationship between social agency and the value form in the major works of Karl Marx. He's the co-author of Myth and Mayhem, a leftist critique of Jordan Peterson, and also Flowers for Marx. He's also the author of the forthcoming book. Is this book? Marxism Contra Subjectivity and the Contagion of Reality, Video Games Between Arts and Politics. He's also an editor of the forthcoming The Conscious Core of the Commodity, Essays on Analysis and Essays on Analysis. He also appeared in Jacobin, Sublation Magazine, Cosmonaut Magazine, The Morning Star, Ariel, Everyday Analysis, the South China Morning Post, the Philosophical Salon, Triple Ampersand, and Marion West. Finally, Conrad, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Okay. Wow. Such high expectations, It's a lot of credentials. Okay. Get into it. So I hope everyone is good this evening. Thank you very much for the introduction. I appreciate that. And yeah, we're here to talk about games, right? That's a good deal, right? You guys get a credit from a higher education institute for talking about games, right? It's almost like a cheat, right? I like it. That's good. No, but seriously, we do have some somewhat, I say somewhat deliberately, somewhat dense theoretical content here as much as I think would be justified in light of how the topic has been taken up. And I mentioned before, and I'll just restate this, I think, really the objective of this class is to, because, this is a very new field. Of course, we're going to talk about this like as we go on. Um, if we're talking about ludology, it sort of retroactively traces its origins to the 1930s and the 1950s with Huizinga and Caillois. But if we really look about in terms of these debates on games, they really didn't begin to mature in any meaningful way until, say, the late 1990s. And we're in a position today where there are probably, anywhere from 3 to 10 people, you could single out as having contributed meaningfully to this field. And in fact, like there's very few places to actually study this, right? I think the only two departments in the world where I forget the exact ones, but the only two in the world where you can actually get degrees in the subject are both in Scandinavia. Um, it's like Finland and Norway or something. I forget. So you're going to see a lot of those names too, right? Because that's where a lot of the scholarship has been concentrated. So you see names like Eskelinen and Arseth and so on, right? In the Nordic countries. So again, it's a very new field. Predominantly, I think it has been diffused throughout the English world and Scandinavia discourse, which has taken place in English. But because it's a very new field, uh, it's also a field that has not necessarily proceeded with a great deal of self-awareness. I think that there have been kind of broad stroke methodological approaches which have been debated. But I don't think there's been anything like a kind of dialectical meta-analysis, if you will, of the way that this discourse is unfolded. And of the way that really, when you look at this discourse, it indexes to changes within the games industry itself, right? So we're not going to get into this so much today, but I think one of the central arguments I want to put forth as we go on is that, if we look at this schism between ludology and narratology, right? Games as systems and rules versus games as interactive narratives, that this sort of the schism begins to take place in the late 90s, right? It's almost, we call it a schism, but in reality, it's almost like a foundational division. But at that very moment, you're seeing a shift in the kinds of games that are being created, right? In other words, there had been, after the 1970s, there'd been an arcing into sort of more linear single player games, and the comparison to cinema was bolstered by, CDRs as storage media, with computer games and PlayStation and things like this. But then I think in the late 90s, you begin to see a shift where games begin to go online, which really changes, I think, the way people perceive games. Of course, both categories, the more narrative and the more iterative, do coexist and coexist today. But I think this begins to change the way people think because you're beginning to see a lot of games that are almost like inexhaustible. You have online play being almost like an inexhaustible repository of user-created content, right? At that level, which does not abide by some kind of strict narrative structuration. In that sense, it's not a linear arc. from beginning to end. And this, of course, in a certain way, it prefaces and anticipates like the shift of gaming into being almost like platform capitalism, which is what we see today, where like, you have, I mean, of course, we could speak more broadly, and there are indie games and all kinds of things, but a lot of the gaming that happens today is happening over the course of, six or seven, products that do have an iterative character, and I think, which I guess Minecraft would be quite archetypal in that sense. And there are signs of this continuing to deepen, right? So I don't know if anybody heard that like there's been this huge delay around Grand Theft Auto 6, right? Like that's and I think much of that has to do with the fact that Grand Theft Auto 5, obviously massively popular, particularly in its um, you know, uh going online when that happened. But I think much of what, the delays around GTA 6 have had to do with attempting to construct um, systemic stability when it comes to the possibility of implementing user-created content, right? So again, we see the deepening of this vector, right, of games as platforms, right, as kind of self-enclosed subsystems or ecosystems in which players can create. So I'm going to explore that more. But um, today we're going to focus primarily on actually, I don't know if you guys had the time to get all the readings done, but we're going to be talking about this potentially trivial, but I think quite indicative in a certain way. Debate over whether games are art with Roger Ebert. And we're also going to be talking about some of these works that were retroactively deemed to be foundational to ludology. Homo Ludens by Johann Huizinga and Man Playing Games by Roger Caillois. And after we get this done, by the way, we will need to you know, establish, put you in groups for presentations. You have to be doing 10-minute presentations of the text going forward. So being groups of 2 to 4, you have a choice as to which text you wish to present. I don't know if you guys consulted the course outline, but some of the details are there. But in essence, you'll just have to do a 10-minute presentation. About two-thirds of it will be devoted to summary and isolating key points. And then about one-third of it will be devoted to a response. And then after that, I expect students here to, it's part of the grade as well, when they feel inspired to offer a 5-minute sort of response to those presentations that are made. So you'll be able to choose one of the texts going forward, but we can deal with that at the end of the course. I think it'll be better to talk about what we're actually doing now, because I think you'll get a better sense maybe of which texts that you'd like to do if we do that. And another small note for you, by the way, there will be no class as originally planned on February 15th. The next class will be on February 22nd. And then the next one after that will be, I believe let me just take a look here. Mm-mm-mm-mm. Right. There's one. So we have today, February 22nd, March 8th, and March 15th. So we actually have two 2-week breaks in there, which is so a little bit more space than the average New Center course. But if you look at the course outline, that'll all be clear. Okay. Do you have any questions about so far about anything? Anything they want to ask? No, we're good. By the way, I just want to be clear, we're not going to talk at length in this course about Disco Elysium, right? Because everybody wants to talk about Disco Elysium. It's, it's a leftist course on gaming. Can't talk about Disco Elysium. Yeah, Matthias.
First of all, what a shame. But actually, I wanted to ask you if you have an expected release date for your book, because the theme of your book is very related to my research. So I wanted to actually read it and maybe use it.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. Sorry, I was just looking at the comments. Someone said there should be a whole course on Disco Elysium. That's why. Um, no, by the way, I love Disco Elysium, probably one of my favorite games. You know that. But it's just so much has been written and said about it. But also, what I want to do in this course, I really want to get away from, because I feel like it's a certain symptom of immaturity when we discuss these things, to talk about the ideological character of a particular product, right? So I'd like to really look at, not that that's bad. I mean, they're close readings that are coveted within academia, but I want to try to talk about the tendential or systematic patterns within the industry as a whole, right? And how it shapes these things, right? So perform a kind of cognitive mapping. So I think there's a lot that can be said that's fascinating about Disco Elysium as a text, but we're not really going to be doing a lot of single text analysis in this course. Um, yes, about when the book comes out. The book will come out later this year. But if you'd like, if you contact me, you can have maybe a draft copy. As for anyone else, I mean, I don't want to distribute too many draft copies because I don't want incomplete copies of my book floating around everywhere else. But I talked to the head of the press, Revolt Press, that's publishing it, and we agreed that we would send out free copies to everybody in the class, free PDFs once it's actually finished. So there you go. You guys paid your 225 or whatever it is. You get your free book. There, we'll gift pack it for you. We'll perk. So is that good? But Matthias, if you want to write me, we can try to work that out if you have an immediate need related to citation.
Sure,
Okay,
thank you.
no problem. But I don't talk about Disco Elysium in the book, so however useful it might be for you. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen. Let's get into this. Mm-mm-mm. Right. Okay. Right. So the course is titled Video Games Between Contagion and Reality. The book is actually called The Contagion of Reality, Video Games Between Art and Politics. It was changed. I don't know why. Could be part of some intellectual master plan. Could just be Mohammed being an artist. We don't know. It does sound cool though. Got to give it this title name. It's cool. Okay. Right. So this starts out with a couple of quotes, which the book also starts out with. We got the principle of play has become corrupted. It is now necessary to take precautions against the contagion of reality. That's Roger Caillois, 1958's Man Playing Games. And then we got a game quote for you. Dreams have a nasty habit of going bad when you're not looking, from Max Payne. Anybody played that? The original Max Payne? Yeah? Oh, okay. Good, good. It's like in that, it's kind of like the game version of those, the genre of like, masculine thrillers that were, you had like what like a Fight Club and all this stuff, like Matrix, right? And all this stuff sort of becomes conspicuously appropriated by like far right culture later on. Um, so over the past 50 years, video games have evolved into the most lucrative media industry in the world. And I think that shift, by the way, really happened with iPhones, right? Because like it was really opening up a larger casual market, right, to digital transactions and everything that really affected that. This has given rise to various attempts to legitimize them culturally, akin to similar strategies pursued with popular music or comic books. And an interesting example of the tensions regarding this process of legitimization can be seen in one of the assigned essays, Roger Ebert in the Games as Art debate by Felon Parker. The debate took place from 2005 to 2010, pitting Roger Ebert, who evinced skepticism that games could ever be art, against a wide array of voices. So you have this debate that takes place, and again, at a very indicative moment, right? Because this is happening just as games are becoming the largest commercial media medium in the world, right? And I think I think even in I want to say November 2004, Halo 2 becomes the largest single media launch in history, right at that time. So you can kind of see the writing on the wall, right, in terms of what's happening at this point. So here we got a picture, got Ebert. A game has rules, points of objectives, and outcome. A critic might cite an immersive game without points or rules, but I would say then it ceases to be a game and becomes a representation of a story, a novel, a play, a dance, a film, right? So he's making a sharp distinction here between the systemic character of games, and a narrative medium, right? So the timing of the debate was again a little bit suggestive Um, but actually, the conditions that led to the debate itself were really quite quaint. In October 2005, Roger Ebert authored a review of director Andrzej Bartkowiak's. I'm sure I'm getting that wrong, but anyway. He did these films like Romeo Must Die, right, with Jet Li. Roger Ebert authored a review of director Bartkowiak's film Doom, giving it the undistinguished score of 1 out of 4 stars. And of course, I'm sure you guys know that Doom, very well known because it's a series of shooters, but the first one had the distinction of being responsible for the popularization of the first-person shooter, right? More marked upon than the review itself, however, were a couple of derisive comments he made about games within it. So Ebert wrote, "No, I haven't played Doom, and I never will, but I know how it feels not to play it because I've seen the movie. Doom is like some kid came over and is using your computer and won't let you play." And he also wrote, "Toward the end of the movie, there's a lengthy point of view shot looking forward over the barrel of a large weapon as it tracks the corridors of the research station. Monsters jump out from behind things and are blasted to death, in a sequence that abandons all attempts at character and dialogue and uncannily resembles a video game." Which is like kind of a funny thing to say because if has anyone seen Doom? This terrible movie? Has anyone seen this? Anyone? Yeah, okay, I got a nod there. But I mean, like, actually, for people who like, kind of into cinema and that stuff, a lot of people will single that out as like the only good thing about the movie, that scene, because it's quite interesting, like the emulation of the first-person shooter, in a cinematic context. But it's funny that he describes it as uncannily resembling a video game because it's like, well, dude, that's obviously what they're doing. Like, it's not. Oh wow, look, whoa, look at my observation. It looks like a video game. Um, so Ebert's point wasn't that Doom was a bad game. Rather, it was that movies shouldn't resemble games, since this makes them no more entertaining than watching someone play one, which does seem like a bit of a quaint point to make in the age of multimillionaire Twitch streamers, one does have to say. But it was common. It was common at that time. I think I have a book, because don't tell anyone this, by the way, but I like reading like film reviews from the New Yorker. Um, so it's a bit of a guilty pleasure of mine. Don't tell anyone that. Like that's really embarrassing. Actually, what I love about the New Yorker when you ever read it is like the font is so good that like it makes me think that not only are they correct, but like I already thought what they were saying before they said it. Like it's such a good font. Anyway, but no, I think in a piece on Black Hawk Down, in the New Yorker in that time, Anthony Lane, for example, he likens it to a game, Ridley Scott's film Black Hawk Down, and he talks about the shift within Hollywood, right, whereby films are beginning to suffer as a result of resembling games. So it was a bit of a trope at the time. Anyway, so he wasn't saying Doom was a bad game, but anyway, the what he said attracted thousands of letters reproaching him. He later commented that it was longer than what, like War and Peace, Anna Karenina, and the brothers Karamazov combined or something. The number of letters he got over this, the word count. So we got thousands of letters reproaching him, and a lot of it was like, why are you doing this, right? Like, why go after a youthful medium that's still vying for legitimacy and besieged by conservative authorities? And this was in a pre-Gamergate environment. So in the past, maybe 10 years, 12 years, the concern has been that games are incubators of right-wing radicalism, which we'll discuss later. But in this climate, the concerns were more related to a blend of, you know, antisocial effects instilled by games in terms of violence and so forth. And basically that they're like addictive or a colossal waste of time, right? So those were the main concerns. And it is interesting about that, right? Because I think the one about violence is so funny because we do this, right? Like you go see in the store, you've got like you know teen, you have to be a teen to play this. You have to be 18 years old, mature, right? And but it's interesting because like it's pure superstition. Like there's never been any sociological evidence, not a single piece of sociological evidence that associates games with violent behavior. The closest thing actually was a study that claimed the connection, but then it was subsequently debunked. by another study that illustrated that the propensity for, quote, aggressive behavior that it imputed to gamers was actually a consequence of frustration with failing objectives. In other words, that it would be instilled in people regardless of whether the game was violent or not, right? It had more to do with difficulty, right? So I used to work in a game store when I was younger, and parents would come in and be like, "Oh, is this game appropriate for my kid?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, like, is it appropriate for you? Are you too sensitive for it? Are you too impressionable for this product?" You know, but parents are the worst, gotta say. Okay, so but so I think under normal circumstances, it would have really made sense for Ebert to ignore this. Like he doesn't know anything about games. He did write a review of a computer game, which surfaced during this whole debate, like in the 80s or something, and he appraised it positively. But by his own admission, he didn't play games. But maybe out of a desire to kind of, exploit this controversy, he took the bait and got involved. And he kind of laid out his more divisive and developed argument in response to one letter he deemed civil enough to respond to. So he argued that games could never be art, right? And this owed to the fact that they don't afford the artist sufficient control to create meaningful statements. Video games, he wrote, by their nature require player choices, which is the opposite of the strategy of serious film and literature, which requires authorial control. So this is the central aspect of his argument, right? That there has to be more control in order to create art than games can afford. We'll touch on it later, but by the way, I think it's important to pay attention to the precise comparison being made here. He makes the comparison to serious film and literature, right? Not to art as a whole. Very, very important when it comes to the construction of how this works. So, in the months that followed, Ebert's statement attracted a number of responses. Clive Barker, renowned horror scribe, who lent his talents to several varyingly successful game projects, Clive Barker's Undying and things like this. He likened Ebert's prejudice towards games to the common prejudice towards horror films. If an experience moves you in some way or another, he stated, even if it moves your bowels, I think it is worthy of some serious study. I think that Ebert's response to that was that a bowel movement is not art. But it is interesting, right? Because he's coming from kind of a horror standpoint. So what he has is kind of an effective, I would say an effective definition of art that's being deployed here. So, I think his point would be that we can get into discussing the finer points, but if something has an effect on you, right? If it can command the sort of level of interest, level of engagement the games have, that would be worthy of study. Which obviously Ebert rejects, right? Kelly Santiago is a game designer working with That Game Company. She gave a TED Talk in which she delved into 3 games she felt were art, namely Waco Resurrection, Braid, and Flower. I like how one of them was from her own company, just a low-key plug for herself. But yeah, Waco Resurrection, of course, is about the Waco, the religious cult in the United States in the 90s that the government, I think they used the National Guard, right, to occupy the compound. So it was an attempt to, and we've had different things like this. Like, what is this one, like Super Columbine Massacre or something? Super Columbine RPG. We've had different people who've kind of, tried to remodel traumatic events within recent American, violent and traumatic events within recent American or global history with the use of games. Very provocative. Also Braid, which is like, I think I played this for about 5 minutes in 2010. It's like, the game where you manipulate time, it's 2D, right? And you get this fortune cookie, like, and then there's Flower, right? Where you literally like the petals on a flower or something. Yeah, I honestly, I played this also. I hate this. It's so pretentious. I can't handle it. And it is really interesting, even if you look at the game she's choosing, because it's quite defensive in a weird way. Like it's like, is this what it is to be art? Like, you know what I mean? Because there's much better games than this, right? So it's very interesting that there's a lean toward this kind of, I don't know, self-consciously artistic content, right? Or self-consciously politically provocative content, right? Rather than just, okay, like these are good games, right? Or even these are narratively insightful games. Like, So this is Kelly Santiago presenting her TED Talk. So we can see Waco Resurrection, Braid, and Flower here. Obviously, Waco Resurrection just looks like a paragon of skillful programming. You can see there. So in response to this, Ebert published another article in April 2010 titled With Characteristic Subtlety, Video Games Can Never Be Art. And this article finds him purporting to double down, but it's actually kind of interesting because he discreetly sort of steps away from his initial claim. So in the article, he claims that the games that Santiago, Braid, Waco Resurrection, Flower, that she uses to prove that games can be art, uh, she compares them to A Voyage to the Moon by George Méliès. And, she says that she finds these, or sorry, Ebert says he finds these pathetic compared to a film like that. But at the same time, he admits that the definition of art is malleable and subjective. So he's not really sticking to his guns in terms of this idea, right, of this idea of narrative fixity or linearity as being a necessary condition of art. And again, I think the key problem of it does have to do with the way that it's tethered to the criteria of film and literature, right? So while in the article he says that saying that games will never be art is rhetorically justified, insofar as no video gamer now living will survive long enough to experience the medium as an art form, he equally couches this in broadly subjective terms. But still, even in this context, I think it was a surprise when just a few months later he wrote another letter or another article. And in that article, he admitted that while he remains skeptical of games as art, he shouldn't have entered the discussion while having known so little about them. And that if abstract art can be art, then gamers can have an experience that for them is art. Right. So you kind of see this, right? Like, he made this claim that really depended on the criterion of film and literature. I think he doesn't say this explicitly, but I think he began to realize that it wasn't really tenable, hence the comparison with abstract art, right? Like, well, that's not, necessarily analogous to the examples in film and literature he was using. So he steps away from it, but he tries to save a little bit of face, right? By suggesting that there's some sort of absence of sophistication, right? Or there's like an effective evocative dimension that games don't have that they'll have to mature towards, right? If they wish to be a real art form. And by the way, shortly after this, Ebert actually died, I think, of colon cancer, right? So that was really interesting. I mean, not his death was interesting, but I mean, the way that people responded to that, because there was a weird, I would say the gaming community was amazingly, there was so much vitriol towards him. You had all kinds of letters being written, people talking about this on forums. But when he died, because he'd been willing to sort of admit, I didn't know that much about it very publicly, there was an attempt to sort of forgive him, for this by the gaming community. And I think a lot of people very generously accredited to him a certain role in, helping push forward this dialogue, right? So it would be tempting to dismiss all this as like a really frivolous episode within popular mediatic culture. I mean, it's Roger Ebert, a guy he's not an academic, didn't even play games, right? Arguing against a bunch of people writing letters on the internet. But I want to suggest that if this debate has some significance, by the way, I want to add for everyone, if you have any questions, you can put up your hand in midway. You don't have to wait to the end. We'll answer. But I want to suggest that if this debate has some significance, it's not because it showed that games are or aren't art. Rather, it's because it exposed quite publicly the limitations of comparing games with film and literature. This needs to be situated in context. If we look at the history of games, I mean, the earliest games were actually social, right? Like you go to the 70s, right? Ted Dabney, Nolan Bushnell, Atari, right? That was happening in arcades, right? And then you had games like Petit 5 or D&D, like early RPGs, often that were based on Dungeons and Dragons, right? Because that's what you did in the 70s, right? You listen to Led Zeppelin and smoke pot and play Dungeons and Dragons, I guess. But well, you had these guys who were basically situated near universities, right, like Stanford, that had network computer systems within them. And what they would be doing is going there and they would be making these kind of D&D simulators. But a conspicuous feature of the early ones they made is they were actually based on multiplayer because they presupposed networked computers, right, within the same institutions, usually. I don't know. It's possible that it was broader in the same institutions. I need to double check the exact context of the ARPANET in that time. But anyway, there was like a mini internet, right, that they were basically exploiting. So games begin kind of social, but what happens is that they go in a more linear and single player direction, basically from the late 70s onward. And this has to do with the way that they enter the home, right? And in turn, it has to do with the development of microprocessors, because it's the development of microprocessors that makes both the Atari VCS and the Apple II possible. And there's actually a link between those, right? Because Steve Jobs actually, I don't know if you know, he actually worked at Atari, right? And then if you look at the Apple II, its earliest version actually came with a paddle, right? So it was very clearly and explicitly designed to facilitate gaming. That was something that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were actually trying to do. Right? So it's in this context that games begin to change, right? I mean, now the ARPANET games were not really commercial, right? They were just hobby games. Actually, a lot of them were deleted from ARPANET systems. Some of the earliest CRPGs that we know of were actually deleted because they were considered to be like time wasters that were taking up file space. Which is kind of funny. But really, the first commercial games were arcade games, right? So when you had the VCS, like the earliest kinds of games you saw in there were arcade ports. Like I think in '78, right, you had Space Invaders, and that got a port that did very well on the VCS, right? But yeah, Pong, Asteroid, Space Invaders, very popular. But what you begin to see is with the shift into the home, games begin to accommodate more the single player experience, right? They become more narrative, they become more linear. They're not based on like the iterative repetition of, a single screen that gets progressively more difficult until it, glitches out or reaches a level of difficulty that's impossible for humans to eclipse. So you could see this in terms of games like Atari's Adventure, right? Because you had Colossal Cave Adventure, right, which was a text adventure. Because early adaptations of Dungeons and Dragons deviate between RPG and adventure. So on one side you get text-based adventures coming out of that, which were based, I think, earliest on the Eliza system, right? Like early LLMs. And then on the other side you get uh, CRPGs like Ultima and Wizardry and so on. But there was a text adventure, Colossal Cave Adventure, that was turned into a visual. It was given a visual version. I think it was on the Atari VCS in 1982, called Adventure. And this is very famous because if anyone has seen Ready Player One, right, they have to find the Easter egg. Let me say that movie. Uh, because the creator, I think it was Warren Robinett, right? He wasn't allowed at the time to put his name on the cart. Because this philosophy was like, well, the designer is no more important than like the guy who assembles the game in the factory, right? Uh, we could get into all this. This is all like legendary history, Raymond Cassar, Universal takeover Atari. I'm not getting into all that right now. But all this is to say that he basically put one of the first Easter eggs in the game to give himself credit. So this is like super interesting, right? Because the idea of games being art, right, that made by an artist, right, is beginning to coalesce at the same moment that they're becoming more narrative in character, that they're becoming more linear single player experiences. These are coinciding, right? So yeah, we have like things like Atari's Adventure, Super Mario Brothers, obviously still has a score, you'll notice when you play that. So you see this kind of throwback to the arcade, but eventually it would disappear in subsequent iterations. But Super Mario Brothers, very significant in terms of the fluid scrolling and the exoticism of the different worlds in it. I think there were a few. I think there was a fluid scrolling Pac-Land, and there's this fluid scrolling game before it that did something similar. And there were obviously platformers before, like Donkey Kong, for example. But what it was doing in terms of, again, like these wide, diverse locales populated with secrets, but fluid side scrolling was very revelatory. And The Legend of Zelda would be another good example in 1986. Right? So this shift into more single player kind of narrative games, it already entailed a shift to a more cinematic or narrative style presentation. And we should remember here, by the way, that the first in-game cutscenes were actually in 1981's Donkey Kong. Started the first cutscenes in games. But I want to add that it wasn't really until the rise of CDRs as a storage media in the 1990s that the comparison with film really became palatable, right? So we see this beginning in the early 90s. I mean, I don't know when like the first CD-based game came out. I'm sure there's like a technical point that might be earlier, but it really becomes popular in the 90s, and then consoles go in this direction quite decisively with the Sony PlayStation, right, which handily outsells the Sega Saturn, Nintendo 64. So here we have an example, right, very, very famous, Aerith's death in Final Fantasy VII, which everyone cried when this happened, right? Very, I'm sure there's some people here maybe old enough or traumatized by this. Had to be there. Or maybe it didn't because they have a remake now. But I also I use this image intentionally as well to point out that it shows you what they were able to do with FMV, right? Full motion video. So when you had CDRs, you could put video on it, right? And the video give a real glow up to what were actually often very, very primitive polygonal displays. So you look in the bottom, we can see the rendering of this scene with background textures and then just, again, very, very coarse kind of polygonal models. But then if we look at the above, we can see what they're doing with these much more sophisticated FMV. And actually, the PlayStation had its own built-in decoder, so it was much better than the Saturn for doing that. So again, I think Final Fantasy VII had like 45 minutes of FMV in it, right? Very, very advanced for 1997, late 97 when it came out. So the rise of CDRs saw the creation of a number of impressive projects that took advantage of the technology associated with full motion video as well as larger texture palettes. And I want to emphasize the texture palettes as well, because they did allow for a lot of aesthetic characterization. Like if you Final Fantasy VII itself, it's clear because again, you have very primitive polygonal models, often graphed atop illustrated backgrounds. Um, but you see something similar if you put like the Resident Evil games of that time, where it's, again, simple polygonal models, but often very striking, visual environments around them that are just built out of textures. So there were a number of games, Final Fantasy VII, Grim Fandango, right, which famously it's based on the Calaca, right, the Mexican Day of the Dead, right, the skeletons and the sort of Aztec folklore, and it has a part of the game famously that channels Casablanca, right? Very, very iconic. And I think that everybody smokes in it, but I think the designers in the manual they later commented, don't we're not endorsing smoking because you got to remember that everyone smoking in this game is already dead, so it makes you wonder. Of course, Metal Gear Solid, which many people dubbed like the first postmodern game when it came out. Hideo Kojima, right? So this period also saw academics begin to adopt the idea of games as a form of storytelling liberated from the constraints of unilinearity, as with, most notably, Janet Murray's 1997 book, Hamlet on the Holodeck, right? And it's very interesting, right? Because I think that, in addition to being representative of, in some respects, of this narrative-driven period of game design, I think that, Hamlet on the holodeck also evolves out of a situation where, a lot of the first people writing about games in this kind of way were people in like literature departments, right? So it was very natural, to approach them based on that sort of framework. But as I said, later we begin to get, the development of like the embryonic development of a more specialized academia emanating out of Scandinavia in particular. But I think again, I think two problems were beginning to emerge with this kind of narrative framing of games, and moreover with the narrative focus within game design itself. So impressive as these kind of games might have been at a general aesthetic level, in terms of sophisticated storytelling, the most narratively ambitious projects of this period were still largely subpar in comparison to exemplary works of film and literature. I mean, don't get me wrong, like I love, Final Fantasy VII, I love Grim Fandango, but I'm not sure if I'd compare it to Casablanca or Vertigo, or on a purely narrative level. Like there's a real immersion, right? You're going to get when you spend 40 hours like in a digital world. I mean, aesthetically, you can do wonderful things, right? And playing a game really gives you a sense of the environment, the ambiance, and inhabiting it, right? In a way that you would not necessarily have watching a 2-hour film. But if we're just taking this up at kind of a symbolic level, okay, what does the narrative mean, right? How deconstructible and applicable is it, right, to our world today? How sophisticated is it? I don't think it's quite at that level, right? So I think what we're seeing here is already that there are certain things that what games can do isn't necessarily moving exactly in that track, right? And I think the other big issue we're seeing here is that um, the narrative shift was itself being contradicted by developments in the industry, right? So in the late 90s, games began to arc in the direction of online games with an inexhaustible repository of free user-created content. StarCraft, Quake, etc. And like I don't want to oversimplify. Like anyone who ever played like use map settings stuff in StarCraft would know that people were actually creating stories online. StarCraft had a great story for what it's worth. So the issue here isn't the absence of narrative or anything like that, but it's just the implications for the larger structure of the industry. When I mean, even moving away from anything like a controllable or ethereal standpoint. I mean, there are narratives, but the narratives are more becoming like at the level of spontaneous interactions between people that you would need like a digital ethnography to understand, right? So, I think we can see some problems with this overall approach. And I think that it wouldn't be wrong to say that probably 97 to maybe 2001 or two is probably like the apex of confidence in the idea of video game storytelling at that level. I don't know when that went wrong exactly. I'm not sure. There may not be an exact moment. Maybe the like 9 hours of cutscenes in Final Fantasy X being like, these like horrible, like cheese, just like terribly acted, fake laughter, all that, in many respects a downgrade from just reading text. I don't know if that was when it went wrong. But I do think there was a loss of confidence relating to different aspects that was beginning to occur, which again does not signal the death knell of the narrative game or anything like that, but it does result in a bit of a shift of focus. So in this context, I think games were really seeking a new strategy for cultural legitimation, right? I think the narrative strategy was beginning to show its limitations, both in terms of industrial shifts and in terms of just, the maybe failure of games to reach the desired level of narrative sophistication that people imagined. So some of these different approaches are discussed in the assigned essay by Fallon Parker, and he actually brings up five. Alignment with established forms, right? So making comparisons between games and other mediums, most commonly film and literature. Though there's an interesting note there that's raised by someone. Someone says like, why wouldn't you compare it to like, something like dance or, it's kind of strange how it's always film and literature, right? So there is a real bias in terms of what kind of established forms are used to or were used to legitimize games in this way. Another one is appeals to medium specificity, right? The idea that games have to be games. Can't judge them by some other standard, right? They just got to be themselves. Rules and systems, right? That's one other mode of legitimation. Another one is the identification of author figures, right? The goats. Who are anyone? I got a question for you. Who's the canon? Who do people? I know this. I know the answer, but I want you guys to tell me. Who are the canon of game designers that people usually trot out as being like exemplary, like the equivalents of like Orson Welles or something, or John Ford, or anyone? Who? Okay, we got some answers in the chat. Hideo Kojima, Team Ico. Okay, that's not a person, but point taken. Jonathan Blow, Kojima. Okay. Sid Meier, Genova Chen, From Software. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Come on, guys. What about Shigeru Miyamoto? Come on, you guys are killing me. What were Molyneux's controversies? What happened to what was his controversy?
Wasn't it
Will
about the
Wright?
game with the cube, the social game that was around like 2016? I was a little too young then, but I remember there was a lot of backlash in the media around it.
Okay, I have to look that up. Iwata, okay, Tim Schafer. Yeah, okay, these are Yuji Horii. Yeah, these are good. Hori's Dragon Quest, right? Is that right? Enix? Is that correct? Yeah. When I was a kid, everybody talked about what? Hironobu Sakaguchi. Now it's Yuji Horii. Yeah, times change. Enix basically bought Square, right? This is the Hideki Kamiya, unfortunately. Sorry. That's in jokes. That's insider baseball. We won't get into that. Okay. But so yeah, there's a number of people that people do this with, right? And it's always debatable, right? Like it's like, but and actually, the reality is I think the obvious inspiration for this is auteur theory within cinema. But if we were to actually analyze auteur theory itself comes from a particular industrial conjuncture as well, which was basically the lawsuits that broke up the ownership of cinemas by the major film production companies in the United States, and thus created this vibrant marketplace for lower budget, like auteur films, right? And this happened in like 58 or something, I forget. So again, it's funny, right? Even with auteur theory, which I think at best is a kind of performative fiction, right? Because that's the thing, right? Like it takes a lot of people to make a film, right? This is quite irreducible. But uh, another one is the notion that games are a synthesis of many art forms, a kind of Wagnerian total art, right? They're every art, right? I think that's a funny one. And another one is populist arguments that position games against high art. So there's a scholar, I think, who um, talked about. It would be interesting to read Hobsbawm as well on this, but there was a scholar who talked about how games would be analogous to lively arts, right? Like jazz or um, cinema that were snubbed, like in the 1920s, right? But I think the most important legitimation strategies are really the first two, right? Alignment with established forms and appeal to medium specificity. And alignment with established forms largely, it has its most visible expression in the comparison with narrative forms, with Janet Murray's narratology, right? And the appeals to medium specificity largely take on the form of what has been termed ludology, right? The idea of judging games, as systems endowed with rules. Time to go. Right. Okay. So I want to, what we're going to do here, the content that we're going to narrow in on, just in this first class, it really deals with the authors who are retroactively incorporated into a ludological motif. So this is what Fallon writes about ludology. Certain early game scholars and critics, dubbed the ludologists, took a similar approach, identifying interactive rule-based systems as the medium-specific essence of games and rejecting the idea that games could be a storytelling medium, along with concordant attempts to make sense of them using literary methods. Game developer Rod Humble adopts this perspective in his 2006 account of games as art, writing that, quote, a game needs nothing else apart from its rules to succeed as a work of art, and suggesting that any attempt to dismiss games but does not consider their essential rule-basedness is missing the point. And by the way, here we have this ridiculous image someone created of Janet Murray and Espen Aarseth, scholars strongly associated with ludology and narratology. But there's a little bit of modesty in the image because it says November fight of the month. Really, November? Is that minor? Um, so again, we're going to talk more about this in the classes that come. What I really just want to touch on, not for too long, but I really want to touch on now is just some of the way that there was a certain tradition of thought that was disinterred and put in the service of the idea of medium specificity, right, as this developed. Um, so I think the most important text that single most important text that becomes central to this idea of ludology is Johann Huizinga, Homo Ludens, a study of the play element in culture. These guys just playing checkers here. Checkers? Yeah, that's pretty good. Backgammon. Backgammon. Oh my God, I'm stupid. Backgammon. Okay, yeah. This is it. I don't only know video games. I don't know anything else. Um, but by the way, did you guys read the Huizinga? Did people read it? It's a good book, right? It's a fun book. Did you guys enjoy it? Any thoughts on that?
Actually, I think it's very interesting that Huizinga actually works with the concept of play and not games
Yeah.
themselves, because play is something you play, not even you do, you play. You can only play something that is playable I mean, it's a relation, not a formal definition. And that's very interesting because you can play with things that were not intended to be played with, and you can actually not play games. If you play a game because you need to study it for a paper or because it's your work, are you really playing in the Huizinga definition of play? And I got myself
Yeah,
thinking about that.
but he also sorry, continue.
Yeah, I finished.
Oh, but it's interesting because he also but the thing is play becomes and this I guess this is like I don't know, what do you like an overextension of the principles of the understanding for Kant? But play it takes on such a wide range of definitions for him
Yeah.
that like so here's the thing, like I get what you're saying, but he also attributes play to philosophy. So then it's like, well, okay, but then if you're studying it, right? And are so he says science is a little bit
Yeah, and
um
war and etc.
yeah.
etc.
Yeah. So if you are studying a game to make a philosophical argument, like in this course, I'm like trying to kind of take, the history of computer game studies and kind of like an alarm clock and kind of take it apart and rebuild it. Like, but in a way, you are playing as well. So, but it just speaks to, in a sense, a certain impossibility within his terms because they're so amorphous at that level, you know?
True. There's an author called Brian Upton who
Yeah.
actually tries to give more, I don't know, a concrete definition of play. And he has a very interesting diagram of the cultural cascade of play in the way that for example, if I write a theater play, I'm actually playing within a set of rules to create that play, and then an actor will do their own play with my play, and then the audience will
Yeah.
play and so it goes and it goes.
Yeah. And it also shows you like the limitations of Roger Ebert's definition, right? Like even that
Yeah,
example you said,
yeah,
because it's like, like you already have different parties interacting with game, like interacting with a film, for example, right?
yes,
So, it's, in an abstract philosophical sense, like there's no artistic engagement that's like a pure expression of ethereal will, right? Like where does ethereal will come from? How is it shaped? I mean, it's social from the get-go. But I mean, very obviously, when someone's acting in a movie, right, they're also fulfilling a kind of play task, right, on that level. So it's, yeah, I mean, I feel like the book definitely asks more questions than it can answer. But I saw in the whole book to you just because I think it's like a really good, just for you guys. Like we can't do justice to everything in it, but I just think it's good for you guys if you have the time to just read through it to kind of get on the level with that because it's something that's always going to come up in these discussions. You but the core argument of Homo Ludens, yeah, is that though it's often seen as a product of culture, play is actually anterior to culture, right? Play is formative of culture, right? So he says man could be Homo sapiens and Homo faber, but also Homo Ludens, right? So Huizinga observes that the capacity for cultures to not lapse into unironic acts of violence arises from the instantiation of a magic circle of play that engulfs different areas of human activity, from law to philosophy to organized war. And this is like where the book is very sophisticated, right? Because it does, I think it's a very valid point, how much of human culture is organized this way, right? The idea of a legal system with rules, for example. I mean, even when we think of um, you know, like Platonic philosophy is often misunderstood. I had a supervisor who wrote about this because it's not Plato is not as opposed to the sophists as one might imagine. He does highlight the need for the search for truth, but he nevertheless uh, believes in a certain sense in philosophy as a set of rules that have to be abided to, right? So there's a method that's going to get us there, right? So the sophists were very fastidious about method, right? The question pertains to the objective, as it were, or content, which will have implications for the method as well. Um, but yeah, Huizinga was staunchly opposed to the Nazi regime as well as Bolshevism. And I think it's pretty clear when you read this book that, you know, a big source of the underlying anxiety is the loss of bourgeois, or maybe in some cases even aristocratic ritual, the idea that this is licensed spectacular acts of violence, right? Total war, for instance, rather than the use of single combat to resolve quarrels. So he talks a lot about this, right? The way that war traditionally was organized in such a way to prevent it from engulfing the entirety of the society and key infrastructure and things like that. But how now we seem to be in this spiral, right? That's actually it's very interesting because actually trying to pin down what he's saying about war is not easy in the book and fascism. He talks about the lapse into pluralism in the culture, false play, uses different terms. He says that when play and seriousness blur together, there's no clear distinction between the two, which I think is interesting. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think again the overall impulse that he's trying to, I think the overall impulse he's trying to express is that there needs to be a clear delineation between these two areas, right? Not that it's ever totally clear, but a somewhat clear delineation. And I think that when that's lost, there's all kinds of aporias and paradoxes, but also a kind of nihilistic cultural impulse. And he does discuss Carl Schmitt here, right? And I think it's really interesting. One point he makes about Schmitt's like friend-enemy distinction is that, um, he says seriousness is the place of peace, not war, right? So, war should not be pursued in this. It has to have a play element, right? Lest it become endlessly destructive. So if your starting premise for fighting a war is like the total dehumanization, right, or oppositional status of the other, then you're gonna not gonna be good, right? But it's also, I think, important in terms of this book to understand that it's a very elitist book. I mean, it's written by like a Dutch bourgeois in the 1930s. I probably don't need to tell you that. But in many respects, play for him is like the antidote to democracy or over democratization, right? So again, Huizinga was opposed to Nazism. He was opposed to Bolshevism. He died actually a few weeks before the end of World War II. He's under house arrest by the Nazis, I believe. But he clearly believes that the aesthetic and socializing character of play helps to mitigate against the leveling down and democratization of culture and the entry of half-educated masses into the international traffic of the mind, right? So in other words, like I think one way of understanding this is that it's like even if you think of a law would be a really good example, right? So, we have these moments of enormous public anger. We see it now with the Epstein files, for example, where there's kind of populist impulse, right, that spreads. And, people are in a society where people can read, where people can vote. Of course, they have more potential sway over how society functions than in one in which they cannot. That is to say, a modern society. But Huizinga would believe that something like law is necessary to prevent there from being a kind of pure mob rule in that sense, right? That there has to be a kind of rule-based mediation, a kind of play, a mediation that derives from the play principle in that sense, right? So, and it's actually, he traces a lot of contemporary problems back to the French Revolution in his view, right? He's like, oh, that made everyone take everything super serious, right? And he talks about, how the cult of the periwig and kind of the playful and frolicsome male attire of the 18th century, right, was never restored. It makes some interesting generalizations that link up politics with fashion. But so the other major text disinterred in the context of ludology was Roger Caillois' 1958 Man Playing Games. And maybe unsurprisingly, the major approach issued by Caillois to Huizinga is that Huizinga is too elitist. His vision of play only focused on its agonistic self-improving dimension for utilitarian reasons rather than opting for a more expansive treatment, right? So like when Huizinga talks about play, but all he's really interested in are like these kind of skill-based games, right? Or skill-based contests, right? You're going to be you're going to like do a Olympics, right? Or maybe philosophy, or maybe law, right? But Kaiwa's point is this doesn't actually express the breadth of the way that people play, right? So he delineates four forms of play. We have agon, alia, mimicry, and elinx, right? So agon is the kind of the forms of play, again, competitive sporting events would be a good example, or chess. It's like a properly skill-based competitive play. Uh, Alia is chance, gambling is the thing that he talks about. He loves Brazilian bijo. He talks about that with Brazil, where you pick the animal. Any Brazilians here? No, you pick the animal cards.
Oh,
Really
jogo
into
do
that.
bicho. Oh no.
Yeah, yeah, I'm obsessed with this now. I need to go to Brazil and try this because Roger Caillois talks about it for like 50
Yeah,
pages in this book. He's
please
obsessed
come
with
to Brazil. Yeah.
it. That's like a meme, right? Uh, okay. And he has mimicry or simulation, right? So like charades would be a good example, but all kinds of mass-based practices, right, in anthropological contexts. Of course, we have Halloween, so not just. And e-links or vertigo, right? So you could think of like children spinning around in a circle till they fall over, or like drinking games would be characteristic of this. And he says these can be placed in a continuum with two opposite poles, one of them referring to frolicsome improvisation, paria, and the other to structured rules, ludus. So I have a chart here. Will help sort this out. So you can see that you have agon, alia, mimicry, and e-links, and then they run in a spectrum, right? So, you could race someone or wrestle someone in an unregulated way. That's a contest, but it's not really regulated. But then we go up to boxing, billiards, fencing, checker, football, chess. Alia we have here, right? Not so structured, counting out rhymes, heads or tails, more structured, betting or roulette, right? Mimicry or simulation, children's initiations, games of illusion, tag arms, mass disguises, but then more organized theater, spectacles in general. And ilinks, right? Children whirling, horseback riding, swinging, waltzing, more organized, volador, traveling carnivals, skiing, mountain climbing, tightrope walking, right? So interesting there. Now, while Kawa frames his broadening of play as an anti-elitist move, we could be somewhat skeptical, right? Uh, in the 1930s, Caillois followed the siren of his peers at the French College of Sociology, including Georges Bataille, and seeing the remedy to modernity as lying in the restoration of rituals which resist the injunction to mindlessly engage in capitalist production. And a lot of this owed to the influence of the aristocratic philosophy of Nietzsche, for whom waste is a necessary consequence of the growth of life. Indeed, it is the teaching of Nietzsche, as Bataille wrote, that brings about free human destiny, severing it from its rational enslavement to production. Now, Caillois later came to distance himself from this tendency on the grounds of what he saw as an overappreciation of irrationalism. But a subtler version of the same impulse is apparent in Man Playing Games, since his valorization of gambling, for instance, stems precisely from its wasteful or non-utilitarian aspect. And I want to add here quickly that Caillois is a bit of a I don't think this is so well known in the English world, but like I brought this up to someone French from the French left that I was writing on Roger Caillois, and their immediate response was, "Oh, he's like a facho, he's like a fascist." Uh, so that's not exactly fair, but there is some negative marks. In the So again, there was this whole like in the 30s, the stuff was a little bit culturally fascist adjacent. even though he's associated with the Surrealists, who were more associated with Marxism. But he later said he regretted some of that. And there was a whole thing about like strong man and this kind of thing. And this is a really interesting climate, right? Because this is where they generate the sort of myth that um, Nietzsche was Nazified by his sister, which Domenico Lasordo later shows to be completely fake. It was actually the opposite. His sister actually removed anti-Semitic parts of his writings. There's a myth, but that was sort of generated in the setting. But the other thing is that in the 50s, he had a big debate with Claude Lévi-Strauss, and he attacked Claude Lévi-Strauss' structural anthropology for being arid, right, and turning cultures into lists of terms, basically, right, organized into some kind of synchronic structure. But also the debate pertained to cultural relativism because he argued that Levi-Strauss was making cultures entirely relative, like there was no global logic you could apply to it. But this also redoubled as a strong defense of colonialism, and it was quite racist, right? His intervention in these issues. So Aimé Césaire, right, the famed um, sort of francophone um, African intellectual, he intervenes with his discourse on colonialism and actually attacks Caillois for this. And Césaire is best known for his often he's cited in relation to the boomerang theory, right, which is the idea that Hitler was not exceptional as such, but that Hitler was what made him exceptional was that he was applying the same forms of violence that had been practiced in the colonies of the West within Europe. So the violence boomeranged and came back into the center, right? But it wasn't an issue of, Hitler being so much worse than, the British Empire or the Belgian, Congo or anything like that, right? So just a little bit on our proud founders. But about gambling. So this is I want to talk about gambling. And I want to talk about Caillois' defense of gambling. And I want to make a few criticisms. And in my book, actually, the afterword is devoted to tackling this subject, but I'm not sure if we're going to get the chance in the rest of the course. So I thought now might be an okay time to bring it up. Later on, I'm going to try to relate it more to developments within the game industry itself, which is my strategy in the book. But so we should note a few things. Um, so his kind of social defense of gambling is implicitly elitist itself, because it's based on the idea that there will always be those who are unable to compete meritocratically. Therefore, aleatory games are needed to facilitate their inclusion. So basically, like, there's just people that are so dumb that they're never going to do anything meritocratically. So, gambling, okay, right? But this is a bit of this is already a bit of a weird angle to take because he doesn't actually ask the question of why some are more able than others. He just accepts inequality as a kind of fait accompli. And it's very interesting, right? Like, because the affirmations of the inevitability of inequality really heighten in terms of their pitch and tenor, as inequality actually begins to be erased, right? So, it's mass literacy that's beginning to grip certain areas when Nietzsche is insisting upon slavery as a necessary constituent element of all culture, right? And I think it's clear that Nietzsche wasn't just talking about slavery metaphorically, right? It's all a metaphor, right? It's like Plato talks about slavery, one part of the soul enslaved to the other, it's just a metaphor. Like, he's not talking about the dominant economic relation of ancient Greece. Dear God. But the other aspect of it is this defensive gambling totally ignores the class character of gambling. That is the way it facilitates the transmission of wealth from poor to rich. And I think this should have been clear enough in France in the 1950s. There has been studies on this, right, which are pretty damning. Of course, we have these kind of romantic images of gambling in our head. It's like James Bond or something. But a lot of the bread and butter is just slot machines that prey on working class people and things like this. And that again, like in France, you had gambling, of course, in that time. Le Havre and other areas were hotbeds of gambling, including working class gambling. So it's not as if him writing it in 1958 that wouldn't have been apparent. And another interesting thing is that Caillois associates here total commitment to meritocratic utilitarianism with socialism, since it's supposedly obsessed with obtaining an unobtainable equality, organizing production efficiently. So agon for him taken to its apotheosis just becomes socialism or communism. So that's what I explore in the afterword. And I'm kind of interested in that. That's interesting. So we might ask how bad it is in that question, in that context. But I think these points are important to keep in mind, since as the game industry develops itself, it also becomes less invested in agon, right? So we see these kind of slot machine like loot boxes that have been banned in many jurisdictions. China, obviously, very sensitive with this stuff. And pay to win, right? The infamous pay to win, right? Uh, and I want to stress that, as with much of the commercial world, this isn't a matter of lifting up the invalid. It really occurs hand in hand with the larger process of monopolization and the pervasion of the industry by anti-consumer practices. Actions which, as we shall see, turn out to have rather severe consequences. So I think there's some major oversights in Caillois' analysis, which I think is dangerous in certain ways. I mean, I think I think there are serious problems with this text. But as we go forward, what we're going to see, which I think is going to be clear when we get to play anything, is the way that the elitist dimension of this poses problems and limitations for, the analysis of games and ludology at a higher stage, right? And it's not the same, right? Like how these concepts are appropriated within the context of consumer capitalism or late capitalism, we're going to call it. It's not the same. It's modified, but there is a residue of elitism that persists that I think we have to pay attention to when we're going through this. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. There we go. What I want to suggest now is, why don't we take 5 minutes, come back at 11:33, and then we'll ask questions and put you guys in groups, okay? Does that work? Yeah, 5 minutes, okay. Thank you. Hello? People back? Okay, good. Right. So that was the first presentation. Maybe a little bit we're not quite getting to the climax of the course so far. We're just setting the table. So but anyone have any questions about that? Are there any questions, any thoughts about that? What do you say? Like yeah, Arnab.
Conrad, I was thinking of Bataille, Georges Bataille, and
Yeah.
his his connection with the surrealists and Roger Caillois also. So, does Bataille have any writings on as related to games or gaming or play as such?
Someone else would have to answer that. Like I'm not a Bataille expert. I've read a few things. It wouldn't surprise me,
Same.
but I don't necessarily think that he tackled the topic systematically. If anyone knows the answer to that, feel free to jump in. If we have any Bataille heads here. No, okay. Um, no, but again, but I think that the you can see the link between the general, right? Because it's about like, resisting the transformation of society, into this kind of, machine for production, right? In that way.
Right.
So, which again is a kind of Nietzsche derived idea.
It's also related. Yes, it's also related to what Freud and Marcuse had to say about the eros and thanatos, the drive of life and the death drive.
Yes.
I think because
Yes.
that
Yeah, in the sense that there's an absence of thanatic drive in Huizinga's representation, right?
right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting question. Yeah, and I mean like psychoanalysis can be yeah, I mean there's always the risk there of a certain kind of essentialization of social relations, right? That you
Right.
have. I mean, there's been many critiques that have talked about the limitations of psychoanalysis with respect to the single family and that sort of
Yes.
structure. But I think, we can see it with people who transform like Lacanian ontological negativity into this, and it's funny sometimes when it gets applied to science, right? Because people will be like, you know, oh well, like if we don't, it's like Stephen Jay Gould would be like, well, evolution has contingent aspects. Then it's like, oh, that's proof that there's a negativity in the world. Then someone else will
Right.
write a book and they'll be like, well, that's actually if you look at bacteria, maybe it's not like contingent. Like,
Right.
so, the problem is when you attribute this unrational or unrationalizable dimension to something, at what point does that become an obstacle to a more rationalistic political intervention?
Exactly.
So we see
Because
this, right? Like,
yes.
sorry, continue.
Yes, I agree. No, I agree with you, Conrad, because although I think Enlightenment reasoning has its limits, but still it's the most acceptable legacy we have as far as science is concerned. Because I find it difficult as a like in the current geopolitical situation, to as a uh, post-colonial subject, to think about the totalizing aspects of enlightenment reason, the totalizing or the universalizing aspects. But I think, uh, despite its limitations, as I said, it's the best legacy we have to contend with essentializing forces that stem from local ethnic nationalisms, as in India, nationalism as in
Hmm.
India, and also across the world, for that matter, from we have this situation where 47 nations presently have populist governments.
Hmm.
So it's like a resurgence of the mid the, the the resurgence of history uh, to a certain extent. But again, I think I personally think that it's at present it's a sort of idolizing of uh, the post secular constructs like nationalism and
Hmm.
patriotism as sort of uh, gods, if I may use that term, uh, gods to worship, or to uh, to impose limits on human beings and societies. If that is an accurate description, I don't know. So
No, no, I think it's well, and I know this is a really big issue in India. I mean, I work for a cultural studies journal
yes,
and I read papers that people write, and it's astonishing the things that people try to pass off as academic in terms of Hindu nationalism and things
exactly,
like that. Yeah. So it shows you
exactly,
how much that's penetrated the norms of superstructural acceptability in the country.
absolutely, absolutely. And they are,
Continue.
no, go on.
Oh,
Uh,
well, no, I mean the problem Abba's saying something. Uh his ideas in games such as Cruelty Squad could be helpful, although more focused on politics, economics, and sociology. Okay, that's nice. That's useful. Someone else writes, psychoanalysis is one of the most academically accepted forms of play belief. LOL. Well, yes. The old joke, right? Psychoanalysis will turn out to be a neurosis itself, you know? And games are a neurosis, right? In the psychoanalytical sense, right? Because like it's an obsession that is premised on the suspension of reality, right? In that way. But what I mean is it's like, so yeah, I mean, I mean, I'm gonna show in terms of games, I'm gonna, I mean, well, look, with the problem with Enlightenment reason is the fact that it comes from somewhere. But at the same time, it's like, there's been obviously an obsession with socially locating Enlightenment
right,
norms of reason for
right.
understandable reasons. But the problem is that, like, you know, and I think it's very interesting when you read Donna Haraway on this, right? Situated Knowledges. Like,
Yes,
and she brings up a lot of good points, and she does argue that social location can help enhance, but it's very interesting that she puts it in a dialogue in some ways with Louis Althusser. But I do think one thing that Louis Althusser is right about, and we can argue about hard sciences and soft sciences, but if we're really looking at a science, like, you know, it doesn't matter where the fuck it comes from. I mean, like,
exactly, exactly.
a slave-driven commodity economy is what produced
Right.
mathematics. Like
Absolutely.
that's not what's relevant. So,
Right.
I think that even in the more charitable treatments within academia, I think that there are things that are missed. But obviously, when we talk about
Yes.
uh, like sociology, that's not the same as
Mhm.
math. So, I
Right.
don't even think that I think the way knowledge is influenced by epistemic norms in different ways is going to be. But I want to just say this about games, and I'm gonna show my hand here a little bit because I want to pursue in this course. I want to pursue two maybe thought experiments. And the first one is, could agonism be part of could it be a component of an Enlightenment political project? In the sense that, if you're playing an agonistic game, you want to make sure that it's skill-based, that everyone's set up at the same level, that there aren't
Right.
systematic inequalities. But is it possible that you need to go beyond the magic circle of play and apply that logic to reality, right? In order to um, realize something that's non-elitist. And this would be an extension of, Huizinga's, because he associates it with formal bourgeois norms. But like the problem is that that's not, um, there's going to be a problem in terms of the formal versus the social in that aspect, right? What the formal structuring versus what society actually is. The second thing I want to do is I want to pursue a different strategy of legitimation for games, not one that Bowen Parker mentions, and that strategy of legitimation is going to be to argue that games have a, if they have a special legitimacy, it's because they have come to most directly mirror the structure of advanced capitalism, right? So in a kind of representational, in a kind of realist aspect, that they more effectively mirror our larger economy and political process than any other medium today, which is why they become politicized to the degree that they do. So we'll be pursuing that.
It's very interesting, actually. Oh, sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for raising these points.
Thank you, Conrad.
Did you have anything else, Dad? No? Okay. Anyone else? Are there any other comments? Anyone else?
Well, I can just share my general thoughts. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's relevant here, but when you were talking, I was thinking a lot about Nikolai Dubovsky's manifesto of the deep game. Maybe people know him for the game Pathologic that his studio I Speak Lodge made. So Dubovsky is arguing that games can be art, and he made a whole lecture that was really inspired by a Soviet anthropologist, Vladimir Prop, who kind of discovered how magical fairy tales are connected to the tribalist culture and to the ritual of like becoming an adult in your tribe. And he connects this all with Artaud theater of violence, and he makes his games his early games, because now he's a totally different person 20 years after that, but he makes his games kind of trying to connect this all with each other. So the games are kind of a ritualistic experience that you as a player play, and you have to kind of make with this ritual of dying and awakening from your death while you're playing the game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. Prop is that Russian formalism?
Well,
Is that right?
I don't know about formalism. He is like an ethnographist, so he went to different like villages and
Yeah.
collected fairy tales and analyzed the different fairy tales across the world, trying to find
But
the original ones, like discovering why fairy tales are the way they are.
right. I know Jameson deals with them in his book where he talks about it in relation to structuralism, which is interesting as a precursor of some sort to it. So I read a little bit on this. Yeah. Thank you for that. Maureen?
I mean, he was a structural anthropologist primarily, and he just made structural investigations of how different Russian fairy tales were actually made, how certain characters and certain themes and certain concepts will interact with each other. And he just wanted to like make a really big map of that. That's the whole point of his whole theory. It's not really something very theoretically or philosophically deep. It's just a really
Yeah.
structuralist anthropological excursion through Russian fairy tales.
Okay. Let's see. Is someone here says he's not a formalist? We'll see. Maybe I'm probably wrong. Yes, Vladimir Prop is considered a key Soviet Russian formalist scholar, renowned for his structural analysis of Russian folktales. Probably people use different terms in different languages. That's gonna be my guess. But probably the term was used in association, but we could maybe dispute it. Yes. But yes, it makes sense that it would be invoked in relation to structuralism by Jameson. Um, okay. So
Can
what we
you,
have to do now.
what
Oh,
book have
continue.
you
Sorry.
read about him? Can you repeat the name of that book?
Well, it's not. Yeah, it wasn't about. He's discussed in it. Uh, so in the Political Unconscious by Jameson, I'm using AI here, specifically in the chapter Magical Narratives on the dialectical use of genre criticism. He critiques Propp's formalist method for ignoring history, instead repurposing Propp's functions to uncover the underlying political and ideological structure within romance narratives. But I think he's discussed in other ones. Uh, right. The Prison House of Language. Yeah, The Prison House of Language, a critical account of structuralism and Russian formalism from 1972. Yeah, The Prison House of Language. Yeah, yeah. So I read that. Um, yes, I don't actually read authors. I just read Marx's on authors. It's a slightly vulgarized conception of reality. But uh that's okay. That's okay. Now I get to be one myself. It's good. It's fun. So no, that's not true. I do read authors, by the way, but sometimes I read Marxist on authors instead. Okay, but now what we're gonna need to do, we're gonna need to revisionist. Okay, good, 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 good. I like how we got there already. 11:50. We already made it. Okay, now what we're gonna do is we have to get you guys to like, you guys got to pick texts you want to do to present on. Because did you guys look at the course outline? How engaged are you? Did you guys look at the course outline? Probably didn't. Lazy. Uh, Students will have to do a 10-minute presentation in groups of 2 to 4 on one of the 6 texts we'll be tackling during our final 3 classes. Those of February 22nd, March 8th, and 15th. Students will be placed in groups and select which text they'd like to present on during our first class on February 8th. Presentations will be done at the outset of the class, which the corresponding text is discussed and can be pre-recorded, so you can make videos if you want. Should be devoted 2/3 to summarizing the text in question, as well as supplying key quotes, and 1/3 to critical reflections. So are the people you guys want to work with or text you want to do? Like, uh, okay, so I'm gonna like, basically what you guys can do is I'm gonna like use Word, this program, Microsoft Word, you can write in it. It's really great. So I'm gonna use Word and I'm going to write down so Nebo Purpura, that can't be your real name, right? Is that the name in the course list? Because you got to give me your name in the course list. What's
That's
your
the
name in the
name
course
in
list?
the course list, but you have
Oh,
to
really?
give me the definition of what you consider real now.
Oh, well, we have 8 minutes, okay? Uh, so you want to do play anything?
Yeah.
Okay. That's quite masochistic of you, really. Anybody? Okay, Bianca Ait also wants to do play anything, okay? I'm
It's
probably
called
gonna murder all your
it.
names, by the way. I'm
It's good.
notorious. Is that correct? I'm notorious. I can't pronounce anything. I can speak French, astonishingly, but
It's a German surname. It's called Itte.
Ita. Okay, you said it's German? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know where it's coming from.
You-
I've never met another person with a similar second name.
Okay. Okay, so we got a group of two for play anything going. Anyone else have anything they want to do? So you guys will work together, like, and then we'll see however many people can hop in. And Hector wants to work with ludology meets narratology because he checked it and it's the shortest text. That's why. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, yes. Okay. Uh, let's see here. Hector Almeida. Okay. Uh, by the way, that text is so obscure that it actually went offline. So I had to use Wayback Machine to get a copy. That's how important the literature is we're discussing in this class. Um, um, okay, so Matthew Seraphim wants Hamlet on the holodeck. Wait 1 second. Give me a minute. This is oh my God, you guys. This is okay. Alex Maisie for Play Anything. No one wants to do When Gaming Became Sexist. Wait. Uh, I feel like I'm. I
I
feel like
wrote it a
I'm.
while back, so sorry.
Uh,
I think I'm
I
the
feel
only
like
one
I'm.
that
I'm
wants
at.
to do that one.
I feel like I'm at an auction now. Uh, Hector Almeida for Ludology meets narratology. Okay, let's see. Uh, okay, so Arnab, you can't pick those ones because we already did them. So the point is to inform the class of the stuff coming up. Uh, right. Hamlet. This is gonna take a second. I have to go through all yours, so just give me a minute, okay? Uh, Matthias Seraphim. Okay. Wait. Okay. Okay. Let me see. Uh, okay, Jordan. Okay, Afa Nafisi, How Gaming Became Sexist. Okay. Okay, so Marta, you want to do How Gaming Became Sexist? You just said Me Too. Haha, which I don't know if that's a joke about Me Too, but anyway. Marta?
Yeah, yes, I want to join the How Gaming
Okay.
Became Sexist group. Thanks.
I'd also like to do that one too, if
Emily Sizemore. Okay.
yeah.
That's a really great paper, by the way. It's really good.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
took a quick
it's not
look.
like not a big theoretical thing, but it's very
Yeah,
interesting in history.
yeah, definitely.
Uh, okay. So, and Elena Garcia. Okay, so what is Grayson doing? Grayson,
Um,
are you
yeah, I
Hamlet
would
the
like to
holodeck?
do. Yeah, if that works, I would like to do that one. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, let me see here. So, uh, which one do you want? Emmy Asaza? Adam, what's your last name?
Hello, sorry. Emi Sasa, yes. I was wondering if maybe I could do a group with Savi and work on this idea of transgender and queer video games.
Okay, I'm not gonna oppose it. Uh, Maybe more work for you, but you guys want to do it. So this is just what, like a random thing about transgender and queer stuff? You're gonna come up with a presentation? So I don't mean to be derisive, random, but not one of the texts, right?
But maybe we could link it to some topics of the seminar, of course.
Okay, great, great, great. Okay, so Arnab Chakraborty is gonna be in the, let me just see. Arnab Chakraborty. Okay. Okay. I have to go through and I have to try to follow this up. Okay. So Savvy is going to do that. Savvy, what's your name? Savvy, what's your name? Okay. On the course list
Hey,
that way? Okay.
I have an idea.
Lucy?
One way we could do this is just to make a document in the drive and people could simply add their names. Because there's so many messages in the chat. I don't know.
Yeah, but I don't want people changing everything, as it goes. So I just want to get it fixed. So, that's the problem. I
Okay,
don't
well,
want to be like a
I'm
spontaneous.
ludology meets narratology is my choice. Like while I'm on the mic.
Okay, Lucy Paulak, great. That's great because we need another person for that group. But what I'm going to
Okay.
do is I'm going to show you guys it when I write it down so we make sure it's okay.
I also think
Uh,
there's a way to lock the document after people edit it, if you want to do that.
I think we can just write it here, I'm
Okay,
old
yeah, either
school.
way, sorry. Just thought I'd mention it.
I'm just gonna. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I may have missed something here, so I'm gonna share it with you, and you guys can let me know if I missed anything, okay? And make sure your name is on it when I share it. So I probably missed something, but we'll work it out. Okay, do you guys see this? So we got play anything. Here's what I have. Ludology meets narratology. Hamlet on the holodeck. I think there was someone for the gaming situation too, right?
I
For
like
the
to make my
transgender group.
presentation on game situation, Conrad, if possible.
Okay. Carlo. Okay. The gaming situation. There should be someone else for that as well. Now, is this correct? Is this correct? Is there anyone?
Also,
Can you please?
I also wanted to do cybertext.
Cybertext. Jordan, you want to do cybertext? Jordan? Cybertext is
Yes.
amazing, by the way.
Yeah.
Cybertext is like the best book here, to be honest. Like on games, on video games. Okay. Wait. Cybertext.
Can I be a part of two project because I'd like to participate in this transgender and queer stuff also, but I'll do a presentation on Play Anything as well. Is that okay?
Can we just move you to transgender and queer because
No,
there's
can I
three.
do both? Please.
Okay, you can do both, but I'm gonna give you're not gonna get any extra grades for that, That's the problem. I'll just grade you half. I'll grade you 50-50 for it, okay? So there's less liability in each one. That's the good news. Maran Hazar, yeah, you're not in here, right? Where do you want to go?
Well, I firstly just signed up for the sexism text on pop culture magazines, since a lot of my professors actually research
You want to do that?
Yeah, sure. I can add some other
Okay.
literature if that's okay, especially from the Birmingham
Sorry?
School of Culture. I can add some other texts to that if that's okay, especially from the Birmingham School.
Yeah, if you want to do it, go ahead. Alina?
Yeah, I was in the How Gaming Became Sexist too, but apparently that's a bit crowded.
That's full now. So is there anyone from How Gaming Became Sexist or Alina that want to shift to one of these groups? Because we need more people. These are really good, by the way. Cybertext is like the first work of ludology in a modern sense. And it's probably the best book on video games ever written. It's amazing.
I'm interested in doing cybertext.
Okay. Like that's like some real shit. Like
same here, Conrad. I'm interested in the cybertext book also.
Okay. Okay, you want to go to cybertext? Okay.
Could I do both if possible?
Okay. Sure, we'll put you in both. You were in Play Anything, right? Okay.
Sure.
Okay, so and Alina, do we have you in a group?
Not yet. Put me on the transgender and queer.
Okay. Okay. Is everyone
I
in a group
also
now?
wanted to ask if everyone has an access to the Discord chat so we can kind of collaborate with each other because we don't know each other.
Oh my God, Discord. So Zoomer. I love it. I'm old. I don't even know how this stuff works, you know. I think Discord is for right-wing extremists. But
But the whole system of like news center versus chats is there, so
that's okay. I can't reproach. Okay, so is everybody have a group now? Now, one thing I'm going to ask you is if you're presenting in
Oh,
two,
wait.
please tell me,
I'm not in the
Paula.
group. Hey,
Do you
yeah,
want to do gaming situation? Because we need somebody for that.
but okay, because I just signed up for the course yesterday night and I didn't have the time to look at the text. What's the gaming situation about?
The gaming situation is very important. It's by Escalinen, and it launches the biggest journal on computer game studies. It's one of the essays in it. And it's basically a critique of Janet Murray's narrative-based approach. So it's illustrating like some of the almost like fundamental problems of this approach for games and trying to look at how we should be looking for like a new approach to looking at
Okay.
games, more like games as games, or I don't know,
Okay.
maybe that has less interest for you than other things, but I'm just
No,
saying
I'm making
we do
a game
need.
about narrative, so yeah, maybe that's interesting. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, put me on that.
okay, great. That's great. Okay, so now we have 2 to 4 for everything. Now, is there anyone here who's not? Please tell me. Speak now or forever. How do you say? Forever rest your. I don't. I've never been married. I don't know. Uh, does anybody any objections? Is everybody on the list now? Do we have everybody? Good. Arnab, yes.
Conrad, I'm in the list, but my the spelling of
Oh,
both
pardon
my
me.
names are wrong.
Chakra.
And if you could correct, it's
Chakraborty. Okay, so pardon me. I just put no. Pardon me. This doesn't matter.
R.A.
But it's just for my purposes. But pardon me.
Sure.
I got a lot of different
And
cultures to negotiate simultaneously. They're in spelling conventions. Yes, Tomas
exactly.
Londano.
Hello, Conrad. Yeah, I'm in the Hamlet on the holodeck. This.
You want to do Hamlet in the holodeck. Okay. Okay, and okay, good. Is everybody in a group now? Is everybody in a group? Got it?
I'm seeing in the chat, Daniel Copen says gaming situation.
Daniel. Yeah, if anyone sees anyone in the chat who's not talking for whatever reason, please tell me. Daniel Copen. Okay. Okay, so is everybody good then? Does everybody 100%? Everybody good? Everyone's in the right place?
I'm seeing Alum as well in the chat. Says
Okay, wait.
not in a group, but hasn't said which text.
Oh no, alum, but I put alum in, didn't I? Alum. Oh, alum. Alum, can you write which one you want? If your microphone's not working? Ludology means narratology. Okay, so, and is your name just alum? Do I write that? Ava. Okay. Nursulum, ludology meets narratology. Change the name to Ava on the board. Oh, Afa. Oh my God. Okay. Ava Nafisi. Okay. Okay. I'm trying to juggle writing quick with getting these right, okay, guys? No offense intended to you. Uh okay, great. So is everybody on that? Is that good? Everybody good? 100%? Okay, great. So how many students is that? So I think we have 2 repetitions. Now what I'm gonna ask you is what I'm gonna bold and italicize these repetitions so I know. And who is the other repetition? Who's in two groups? Nebo, right?
Yeah, Nebo and
Yeah,
Arnold.
I'm into groups.
Okay. Anyone else into? Just it's it's Arbin and Nebo. Okay. Great. And by the way, when you present, if it's two groups, please let me know that you're in another group when you present, when you do it. Also, one other thing, are you guys okay if we move up discussion, if we move up the gaming situation to the next class on with the Murray? Because I think it'd be better to present them to talk them both them together. So that'll balance things out a little bit. Can we move up the reading of the gaming situation to the next class, which will be on the 22nd? Can we do that?
That's work for me. No problem.
That's work for you?
Yeah.
Okay, that works for you. I thought you said that's work for me. I'm like, dude, you already got to read a book. Like you're complaining about I added an essay. I thought that's too much work for you. Okay. No, I like it. That works for you. Okay, great. Okay, good. So we're gonna
I
move
don't
up.
know
We're gonna
if
talk about
Daniel and Paula agree.
That's okay for
Yeah,
me. The
that's
next
okay.
class
Okay.
is in 2 weeks, right?
Yes, you have 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're gonna move up. We're gonna move that up because that's actually directly in dialogue with Murray. So I just think it'll be great to talk about at the same time. Obviously, like I'm working this out a little bit as I go. So never taught this course before. So okay, that's great. And I guess that means we have a total of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 17, 17, 18, 19, 21, 22, 23, 24. It's like 22 students then. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, guys, then we're done. Any final questions? Any final concerns? Any issues? Oh, by the way, one last thing I do have to say. I have to make this clear for you because if I do not, last thing I have to say, so you will get 10% of your grade will consist of a 5-minute response. So what this basically is that when other people present, if you feel inspired, it's supposed to be spontaneous in the words of the New Center, you but also mandatory. You know, this is in the culture of late capitalist pseudo enthusiasms. So what you're gonna have to do is at some point when somebody presents, each student here is gonna have to do a 5-minute response to that presentation. Okay? So you're gonna have to respond intellectually or what you think. And all of you, that will represent 10% of all your grades, okay? So you're gonna want to respond to something, right, of the multiple presentations here. So that'll be a total of 22 presentations, right? That's gonna take a total of about, I guess that'll be about an hour and a half throughout the rest of the course. Yes, New Center.
I suppose if we have 22 presentations, we can split them and either intersect. One group would make a recording and upload it for discussion with you and students prior to the date. And the other group would present in vivo, so to speak.
Sorry, I'm confused. What are you saying?
What exactly?
I'm just confused. So you're saying, how do you want to do the responses?
Look, when we have presentations, two presentations on one source, one group can upload it to the Google Drive for everyone to see it, pre-recorded version.
Okay.
And the second group would present as usual. In
Okay, that's
Reza
well, we don't have.
Understanding classes, we actually do this because there are also a lot of people and so on.
Okay, okay. So guys, we'll do it this way, okay? We'll do it this way. You can respond in class spontaneously, or you can upload a 5-minute
For the in-class
response.
participation, the option is to discuss pre-recorded and uploaded previously.
Yes, yes. By the way,
preemptively.
and that should be clear, guys. For these presentations, you can also make a video if you want. Like, if you want to make a video for your presentation on these books, you can. But let me explain the other aspect of it. So you have your presentations, but you're gonna have to do responses. And what I was gonna say is that if you're moved, you can make a 5-minute response in class to one of the presentations people make. And I will obviously consider when I assess it that you did it spontaneously. If, on the other hand, by the end of the course, you haven't felt like you want to intervene on that basis, you can record a 5-minute video and upload it to the drive. Okay? And I will grade that. Does that make sense to everyone? Is there any questions? So we've got the presentations, which can be recorded or done in person. And also there are the responses, which can be done simultaneously or recorded and put in the drive. So either of them can be done in recorded form, but everyone should be part of a presentation group and making an individual response of 5 minutes, either putting a recording in the drive or doing it spontaneously. Okay, good, guys? Okay, and of course, I will say finally, you guys will have to do a 4,000-word final essay or 20-minute video presentation for 15 March. That'll be the final work for the course, okay? Good? Okay. It's in the course outline, if you look at it. But the difference is like the course outline, just remember that I think it says it in the course outline, but just remember that you can do the full presentation or the 5-minute presentation recorded and just load it in. But everything else is in the course outline. So you can just look at that. Okay, good guys? Okay, all right, thank you. See you guys next time. Enjoy. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice
Yeah.
day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Conrad. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
No problem. See you guys.